What if I told you that a disease in just 5 years wiped out nearly half of Europe's population? It's hard to imagine, but it's true. The Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, caused unimaginable devastation, leaving cities in ruins and altering the course of history forever. Imagine waking up to a world where the streets are silent, the fields empty, and the once thriving cities are now filled with death and fear. What could have caused such a catastrophe? The year is 1347. In the bustling Mediterranean ports, ships dock carrying cargo, but something is terribly wrong. Their crew members are not unloading crates or greeting family members, but rather they are found lifeless on the decks, their bodies covered in dark, swollen boils. A strange and terrifying disease had arrived. The people on shore, already wary of such events, could hardly imagine what was coming. They had no idea that this wasn't just another sickness. This was the Black Death, and it would change the world forever. The disease didn't wait. It spread rapidly. The Black Death first made its way through the trading routes, like the veins of Europe, using the Silk Road and other routes to travel from the east to the west. The Black Death's journey began in Asia, specifically in China, where it was believed to have started in the region of Mongolia. From there, it spread across the vast landmass of Asia, reaching the Middle East and then, eventually, Europe. As European ships docked in Mediterranean ports, the plague found its way into the hearts of the continent. At the time, there was no understanding of germs or how diseases spread. The people believed that bad air, or miasma, was responsible. However, the truth was even worse. It wasn't the air, but rather infected fleas carried by rats that spread the deadly bacteria called Yersinia pestis. The fleas bit rats, which often lived aboard ships or in homes. As the rats died, the fleas found new hosts, humans. The symptoms of the Black Death were terrifyingly fast and brutal. Infected people would develop fever, chills, and painful buboes, swollen lymph nodes that could become as large as an orange. The buboes turned dark, often purple or black, which led to the name Black Death. Victims often died within just a few days, sometimes hours, of showing symptoms. Imagine feeling fine one moment and then, within a matter of hours, being struck with a fever, your body covered in painful boils, and your life slipping away. One of the most horrifying aspects of the plague was its speed. Entire villages were wiped out in a matter of days. In major cities like Florence, Paris, and London, the disease struck without warning. In some places, it was so rampant that it would take only a week or two for the population to be decimated. This left survivors stunned, desperate, and in many cases, utterly broken. By the time the Black Death had spread across Europe, it had wiped out a staggering 30 to 60% of the population. Entire communities were left desolate, and the effects on Europe's economy were devastating. With so many people dead, there was no one to tend to the fields, no one to work the trades, no one to run the markets. This collapse in labor created an unprecedented crisis, but it also led to the eventual rise in wages for surviving workers as the demand for their labor skyrocketed. Cities were overwhelmed with death, and burial grounds were unable to keep up with the number of victims. In some places, mass graves were dug to accommodate the bodies, while in others, the dead were simply left in the streets. The sheer scale of the catastrophe led people to question everything they had once believed in: their governments, their religion, and even their own existence. As the death toll continued to rise, fear spread even faster than the disease. People had no idea how to protect themselves. Some thought the plague was a punishment from God for their sins. Others believed it was the work of witches or even the Jews, who were blamed and persecuted in many parts of Europe. In places like Strasbourg, mobs attacked Jewish communities, blaming them for poisoning wells, even though there was no evidence to support such accusations. Many people, desperate to save themselves, turned to superstition. Some carried herbs and flowers to ward off the disease, while others fled cities in hopes of escaping the deadly grip of the plague. Wealthy people, fearing for their lives, left their homes and hid in the countryside, but it didn't always help. the plague found its way everywhere, infecting both the rich and the poor. Religion played a significant role during the Black Death, especially as many people turned to faith to make sense of the unimaginable loss. Some believed that the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins and turned to the church for answers. Religious processions were held in cities, with people flagellating themselves, hoping to appease God. But the church, despite its power, had little understanding of the cause of the plague or how to stop it. In fact, the church's failure to protect people from the disease led to a significant loss of trust in its authority. However, the Black Death didn't just erode faith, it also changed the religious landscape. In some regions, the plague led to a rise in radical religious movements, while in others, it encouraged a more questioning, skeptical approach to faith. The aftermath of the plague saw Europe's religious institutions face serious challenges, and some of the deep-seated changes would contribute to the eventual rise of the Renaissance and the Reformation. The long-term effects of the Black Death were profound. Not only did it reshape the economic structure of Europe, but it also led to significant social and political changes. With so many people dead, the feudal system, which had structured European society for centuries, began to unravel. The labor shortages caused by the plague led to demands for higher wages and better working conditions, which in turn sparked labor revolts across Europe. The Black Death also led to a shift in the way people viewed life and death. It became clear that the world was not as predictable or controllable as many had once thought. The notion of death became a more prominent part of cultural expressions, art, and literature. In the arts, we see a shift from the idealized depictions of life to darker, more realistic portrayals of death. This is seen in works like Danse Macabre, where death is depicted as a constant companion, leading people from all walks of life to their inevitable end. Those who survived the Black Death faced their own set of challenges. In addition to the trauma of losing loved ones, the survivors were often left to rebuild communities that were no longer the same. Entire villages were gone, and many survivors found themselves grappling with intense grief, anxiety, and even guilt, wondering why they had survived when so many others hadn't. The plague had a psychological toll as well, with many people experiencing post-traumatic stress. Survivors often found it difficult to return to their normal lives, and some communities took years, even decades, to recover from the social and emotional scars left by the Black Death. What do you think about the Black Death? How do you think a pandemic like this would affect our world today? Could we have done anything to prevent it back then? And how do you think it shaped the world we live in now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss how this historical event changed Europe forever.